Have you ever heard the sound of a knife slipping back into silence? Not slicing, not striking, just returning. That's what your life is now, a knife in a sheath no one dares to touch. You're not a hero. You were never meant to be. You're just what's left when faith dies, but duty doesn't. Tonight, no one will sing about you. No scroll will carry your name. No God will welcome you. You are not remembered. You are erased. And yet, you are here. You are listening. You are still alive. For now. You don't remember your real name. Only the weight of the hood, the pressure behind your eyes, and the cold steel always touching your spine. It's strange how silence becomes your language. Not just silence of the mouth, but silence of thought, of dreams, of memory. They brought you here when you were 12, not because you were gifted, but because no one would miss you. You were not chosen. You were taken and trained, not to live, but to disappear. You move through corridors carved into mountains. You eat in quiet halls where no one looks up. You sleep beneath a roof of stone and ash. You wake up with a blade where a pillow should be. No one speaks your name, not because they fear you, but because you don't have one. The old master, blind, gray, older than stone, says names are for people who expect to be remembered. You don't. You only expect to be sent. Tonight, the wind howls outside the monastery walls. Your fingers tighten around the handle of the dagger. Its bone grip has grown smooth from your touch. You look into the polished obsidian on the wall, and you don't see your face, only shadow, only task. You are not a hero. You are an answer to a question no one should have asked. The bell tolls once, a single low sound. Tonight, someone is going to die, and it won't be you. Not yet. There was a time you believed in something. But belief has weight, and weight gets heavy. So they took it away. Now you carry something lighter, sharper, colder. A dagger doesn't ask you questions. It doesn't care why. It only answers. The old master once said, "Whisper, the blade is your God now. Keep it fed." You didn't laugh. No one ever does. In this place, even irony dies of starvation. You clean your knife with a cloth soaked in wine and ash. That's the ritual, not for the steel, but for your hands. Blood stains less than memory. They taught you how to walk through a crowd without sound, to kill with a finger, to vanish in candlelight. But they never taught you what to do with your thoughts when the target looks like your brother, or your father, or yourself. There was a scroll once, forbidden. You read it behind a crumbling wall. It spoke of peace, of justice, of protecting the weak. And you felt sick, because it sounded familiar, too familiar. You buried the scroll beneath the roots of the fig tree, and you haven't stood in that garden since. They call it loyalty. You call it obedience. And obedience is not belief. It's gravity. Whisper, fall, or be broken. Tonight, the target is a poet, an old man who once wrote something inconvenient. You don't know his name, but they say he dreams of truth. You slide the dagger into your belt and whisper to no one, I hope he dies quickly. Not because you're merciful, but because if he screams, you might remember you still have ears. And mercy has no place, soft, in a life like yours. Your name was Elijah, but you don't say it now. Even in your thoughts, it burns. You were taken on a Thursday, before the moon rose, before the bread cooled. Your mother was humming a song, the one with no words, just breath and warmth and sleep. She turned to speak to you, but her voice never reached you, because you were already gone. The man wore white, like a priest or a wedding, but he carried no light. You didn't fight. You were 6, and the knife he showed you was not for your body. It was for your silence. They said you were special, but not because of talent, because of absence. No siblings, no father, no soldiers in the village who'd ask questions. And so they took you, on a mule, through olive trees, past dry rivers and quiet caves. You cried once. The older boy beside you punched your ribs. Whisper, don't leak, he said. You learned. The first night in the mountain hall, they shaved your head, not for cleanliness, but to take your past. You asked if you'd ever go home. The man with the blind eye said, this is home now. The rest was a lie. You slept on stone. Your dreams smelled like ash and goat fat. You woke to bells and never asked again. On the 7th day, they gave you your new name, None. They said a body moves faster when it carries nothing, not even a self. Now, years later, when you press your face into a damp wall, you sometimes mouth your old name, just to feel it. But even that is fading, like a child's drawing left in the rain. There is a difference between silence and being gone. They taught you the second. Not how to win, but how to vanish. How to fall like a feather no one notices on the floor. The first lesson was simple. You must lose loudly, once. Then you'll never need to lose again. They threw you from a wall, 3 meters high. No warning, no signal. You landed badly. Your ribs sang like broken flutes. You couldn't breathe. And that was the point. Pain wasn't to be avoided. It was to be memorized, so you'd stop fearing it. The next fall, you learned to twist. The next to roll. The next to rise before the dust even settled. Soon, you didn't wait to fall. You moved into it, like water, like shadow, like someone who already accepted the ground. There was a hall with no torches, a room that swallowed sound. There, they taught you the second silence, death without witness. One by one, you were led into darkness, a blade in your hand, a sack over your head, and you had to find the heartbeat in the black. Strike it, hold it, let it fade. You weren't told who it was. Sometimes you think it was one of you. But you never asked. Asking breaks the silence. Breaking the silence means you want to be heard. And if you want to be heard, you're not ready to serve. They showed you how to fall from roofs, from ropes, from horses. They dropped you into rivers, buried you in sand, hung you by your ankles and asked you to listen for footsteps. And slowly, your breathing stopped making noise. Your heart stopped echoing in your chest. Your fear stopped naming itself. You became a falling leaf in winter, already dead before it touched the earth. You were only 14 when they handed you the pipe, not as a gift, but as a threshold. They called it kaf al-hashish, a passage, a ritual, a glimpse. You just knew it tasted like figs and something waiting in the dark. You sat beneath a low red glow in a room that breathed stone, no windows, no sky, only men with shadows for eyes. The pipe moved hand to hand in silence. No prayers, no instructions, only breath and ember. And something shifted. The walls leaned inward like old memories. The ground throbbed beneath you, slow and ancient. Your hands forgot how to be yours. And then you saw it, a garden, not of myths, not gold or wings, but green that never burned, smiles that asked for nothing, bread that stayed warm, peace that didn't need to speak. And her, the girl in white, the one who once waved at you from across a river before your name was folded into silence. She reached through the air, gentle, knowing, and this time you didn't flinch. Your fingers brushed hers, and for a moment something held. Maybe. When you woke, your breath was thick with ash, your skin damp with sorrow you didn't recall choosing. and the old one stood above, nodding. He said, whisper, "Now you've seen. Now you'll never forget what must be earned." You nodded back, not from belief, but because a part of you was still kneeling in that field, and you couldn't bear to leave it behind. From then on, you followed smoke, fought shadows, chased the shape of something no one could prove, but no one dared to deny. When others saw your silence, they called it grace, but they were wrong. You weren't chosen. You were haunted. Because what stayed with you, what they never mentioned, what you never spoke aloud, was that she smiled.
His name was Kasim, one of the few who still whispered in the dormitories. Not prayers, not doubts, just jokes. Quiet ones about how bad the stew was, about how the old master probably couldn't see but still saw everything. You laughed once. That was a mistake. You were both whipped. But it was worth it. Kasim believed, not in blades or rituals or smoke. He believed in the mission. He spoke of justice like it was something you could taste, like it lived behind doors you just hadn't opened yet. You didn't correct him, because you wanted to believe it too. His first mission was in the lower quarter of Haleb, a magistrate fat with gold and guilt. He had sentenced 3 farmers for stealing bread. They were hanged. Your order marked him. Kasim went willingly, smiling, light in his step, blade under his cloak. He said, whispering, "If I die, I'll wake in paradise." You watched him walk into the crowd, blend in, breathe in, disappear. You were waiting on the roof, signal ready, escape route clear. But then he hesitated. The magistrate had a child in his arms, a small boy, crying. Kasim froze. And for the first time, he looked like a boy too. You saw it. You saw the doubt, the pause, the humanity. And then the guards saw it too. They moved faster than you thought they could. You tried to give the signal, but it was too late. Kasim didn't run, didn't scream, didn't beg. He dropped the blade and smiled again, as if that was the real test. And then they cut him down. There was no trial, no body returned, no scroll etched in his name. Only silence, and a new trainee in his bed the next day. You didn't speak for a week. The others thought it was discipline. It wasn't. It was grief, but not for Kasim, for what he believed, and for what you now couldn't. You were 15. The night was cold, not sharp, just hollow. The kind of cold that lives in the bones of old walls and inside young boys. The target was a merchant, not evil, not powerful, just chosen. They said he was leaking maps to the Crusaders, selling secrets, roads, names. Maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. You never saw the proof. You never asked. You waited by his home, by the fig tree with cracked bark. You counted his footsteps, 3 steps per breath, 12 heartbeats per candle mark. You practiced the movement until your shoulder forgot it was attached to you. Then he came, older than you thought, with hands full of lemons. He was humming. You moved, just like they taught you, behind him, close, precise, and you pushed the blade in. Not hard, not messy, just enough. He gasped,
And for a moment, his head turned. His eyes saw you, and there was no anger, no fear, just disappointment. Like a father seeing his son lie for the first time. He dropped the lemons. One rolled to your foot. You still remember its smell. You held him, not because they told you to, but because you didn't know what else to do. His mouth moved, but you couldn't hear the words, only the blood softly dripping on stone. And then he was gone, and you were still there. The silence afterward wasn't the same silence you were trained in. It was louder. It scratched. It stayed. You returned to the fortress at dawn. They didn't ask if it was done. They could see it in your face. The old master clapped your shoulder like you had passed an exam. You wanted to vomit, but you didn't, because the boy who would have was gone, and what stood there now was something new, something sharper, quieter, and not entirely human. You never forgot the sound of that lemon hitting stone. You never forgave yourself for remembering it more vividly than the man's face.
Assassins are not only blades. Sometimes they are shadows with ears. And you were very good at listening. It started with silence, not the forced kind, not obedience, just quiet curiosity. You didn't interrupt, you didn't react. So people forgot you were there. At first, it was harmless. You learned who stole extra bread, who snuck into the garden at night. But then it changed. You were sent to markets, not with a blade, with empty hands. You stood by the spice stalls, listened to merchants speak in double tones. You sat by wells where soldiers whispered about who paid them and who didn't. You knelt in temples, not to pray, but to hear what men beg for when they think no one listens. And slowly, you learned a terrible truth. People say their truest lies when they think they're safe. And you were trained to make them feel safe. Just long enough. They called it intelligence. You called it betrayal in slow motion. One night, you sat with the master scribe. He told a story to the others, a tale of a soldier who defected to the Franks, how the blade caught him in the bathhouse. The others laughed. But you were there. You had heard that soldier's last confession, and it wasn't about betrayal. It was about his daughter, starving in Tripoli. You didn't laugh. You wrote it in your memory. They stopped inviting you to the fire after that, not out of cruelty, out of fear. They began to see you not as one of them, but as the thing that listens after everyone else has fallen asleep. Even the old master spoke to you differently. Once he said, "Spies die alone, but they die knowing more than kings." You wondered if that was supposed to be a comfort or a warning. Now, when you enter a room, conversations stop. Smiles tighten, breaths hold. You speak less than ever, but your head is full of voices, and not all of them are yours.
The old master had no eyes, not since before you were born. They say he lost them in a siege, a boiling flask of oil, a crusader ambush, a scream in the dark. He never talks about it. He doesn't need to, because he sees more than any man with vision. The others say it's magic, a gift from God, or a curse.
You never believed in magic, not really. But when he turns his face toward you, you feel exposed, like your heartbeat has been pinned to the wall. He never raises his voice, never lifts his hand, never threatens. But when you lie, even a small lie, even inside your own skull, he answers it. Once, after Kasim died, you passed him in the corridor, didn't speak, didn't look up. And he said, "Whisper, you are grieving something you never held." You froze. The corridor felt like a tunnel under the earth. And he walked on, as if he'd merely said, "Good morning." Another time, you were preparing for a mission. You felt the hesitation, the old pull in your stomach, the voice whispering, "Why am I doing this?" He entered the chamber, stopped, faced you, and said, "Knives hesitate, blades obey." Then he walked away. You didn't speak for hours after. You started watching him more closely, his hands, his posture, the way he tilted his head when someone lied in his presence. You realized he wasn't seeing people, he was feeling them. Their heat, their movement, the ripple of intention across a room. He told you once, "Whisper, vision fades, but pattern is forever." You think he sees you as a pattern too, not as a boy, not as a killer, but as a thread being pulled toward some final knot. And you don't know if he's guiding you toward the light or the blade. But you follow, because fear is not always the worst feeling. Sometimes being seen is. You once asked where the old assassins go. It was a careless question, a child's curiosity. You were 13. The room fell quiet. Even the wind outside seemed to stop. One of the elders looked at you, not angry, just tired. "There, still here," he said. "You just don't see them anymore." At first, you thought it was metaphor, some poetic nonsense, like the sayings carved into stone above the main hall. But years passed, and you started noticing something strange. Faces you used to see in the courtyard were gone. Voices from morning prayers fell silent. Men who trained you to balance on ropes, to throw knives in the dark, to kill with one strike, vanished. No goodbyes, no funerals, just absence. One day, during supply duty, you were sent to the southern chamber, a place you'd never been. There, you saw him, Brother Rafiq. He'd trained you to run in sandals without making a sound. He now sat in the corner, hands shaking, mouth open, eyes blank. He didn't recognize you, or anyone. He was holding a piece of twine and tying the same knot over and over and over. You asked the quartermaster, "What happened to him?" She said nothing, just placed a finger to her lips. That's when you realized the truth. Assassins don't die in battle. Not most of them. They die slowly, quietly, from within. Their memories fray like old ropes. Their hands forget the rituals. Their minds become full of shadows they once stepped through. The order does not kill them. It simply forgets them. And they forget themselves. You still see them sometimes, in the far halls, near the kitchens, sitting in sunspots like stray cats. They hum to no melody. They murmur names no one remembers. And when a young initiate asks, "Who is that?"
You say nothing, because now you understand. Assassins do not grow old. Whisper, they grow silent.
You never really remembered your father. Just fragments. A beard that smelled like clay. Hands like tree bark. A voice, low and tired, that said your name only once, but it echoed for years. They told you he was a nobody, a shepherd, a debt, an inconvenience. So you learned to forget him, as instructed, as expected, until the day you saw the king. The target was a warlord from the hill tribes. He had crowned himself with iron and declared no allegiance to east or west. A traitor, a blasphemer, a message to be carved in blood. You were sent alone. It was a test, not of skill, but of final obedience. You scaled the cliffs at dusk, waited until the oil lamps dimmed in the great tent, slipped past guards with breathless grace. You stepped inside his chamber, silent as a shadow, the dagger already in your palm, the kill already rehearsed. And then he turned. The candlelight caught his jaw, his brows, his eyes. And your breath betrayed you, because you knew that face, not from memory, but from the emptiness it left behind. He looked like your father, older, heavier, but him. He didn't flinch, didn't call for guards, didn't even reach for the sword near his bed. He just looked at you, soft, steady, and said, "Whisper, I've been waiting." Your fingers tightened, but the dagger felt foreign, like holding someone else's fate. He stepped closer, and in a voice that was too calm, too familiar, he said, "Whisper, do you know who I am?" You didn't answer, because even if he wasn't your father, the part of you that was still a child was now trembling. Your hand dropped. Just for a second, but enough. He reached forward, not to strike, but to hold your wrist. His touch was warm, not like fire, but like memory. And for the first time in years, you heard a word inside your head that wasn't mission, kill, or silence. You heard, "Son?" Whether he said it or not, you heard it. And you ran. Not because of fear, but because something inside you had cracked and you didn't know what would spill out. You never reported the mission. You said the king was gone, slipped away, a missed chance. They believed you, or pretended to. But that night, when you returned to the fortress, the old master passed you in the corridor. He paused, tilted his head, faced you with that blank, terrifying face. "Whisper, sometimes," he said, "a blade remembers where it came from." And he walked away. You never spoke of that night again, but since then, every time you draw your dagger, your hand shakes. Just a little. You were sent to eliminate a priest, a scholar in the city of lamps. He had written something dangerous, too poetic, too true. The city buzzed with markets and incense. You arrived as smoke, slipping between beggars and brass merchants, eyes always down. The priest lived in the inner quarter, behind a red door with no guard, because truth, he said, needed no defense. You waited in the shadow of a minaret, counting breaths, feeling the rhythm of the street. That's when you saw her.
standing across the plaza, draped in white, not royal, not rich, but clean, bright, unbothered by the dust of the world. She turned, and you froze, not because she was beautiful, but because she looked at you like she knew you. Not the killer, not the cloak, you. She stepped forward, through the crowd, straight toward your hiding place, which no one had ever found. You didn't reach for your blade, your hand couldn't. She stopped a few feet away, smiled, not with her mouth, but with her presence. And then she said it. Your name, your real name. Not the number, not the code, not ghost, shadow, or tool. Elia. The sound of it hit you like breath after drowning. You hadn't heard it in a decade. You didn't know it still fit. Do you remember me? She asked. You wanted to lie, to vanish, to pull the world down over your face. But your silence wasn't enough. She reached into her satchel, pulled out a folded cloth, familiar, frayed, with a fig blossom stitched into the corner. It was yours, once, before the monastery, before the mountain, before the blade. I kept it, she whispered, after they took you. And now you remembered. The field, the song, the girl with the ribbon in her hair, the one who watched you disappear into the dust. You stepped back, reflex, survival. She didn't chase, didn't plead. She only said, whisper, you don't have to stay gone forever. And then she walked away. No magic, no storm, just footsteps in the ordinary dust. You didn't finish the mission. You didn't return to the fortress that night. You walked the city until morning, eyes open, blade untouched. Because, for the first time in years, you weren't entirely sure, whisper, what you were. They gave you the oath when you were 12. Wrote it in ink that ran like wine. Gold letters, a red ribbon, a ceremony wrapped in silence. It became your second name, the one they gave you after taking the first. You stood in the circle, stone all around, bare feet pressing into sand. The old master stood before you, eyes closed, hands outstretched. He whispered, "Speak the words that will erase you." And you did. Not because you believed them, but because you wanted to belong. You spoke the lines like a child reciting a lullaby. I serve the silence. I carry no name. I feel no blood but what I spill. I ask no mercy. I live in shadow. I die unseen. The circle hummed. The brothers bowed. A single bell rang. You felt pride, then emptiness, then pride again. They told you that was normal. But years later, you heard those same words again. Not from the fortress, not from the order. From a dying man in a village you were sent to silence. His mouth broken, breath shallow, he whispered, I serve the silence. And then he died. No name, no witness. You stood there, dagger in hand, realizing he had taken the same oath, spoken the same lines, promised the same vanishing.
and no one would remember him, just like no one will remember you. That night, back at the outpost, you recited the words in your mind, but they no longer sounded like power. They sounded like a tomb, 6 lines deep, carved into the walls of your soul. And every time you speak them now, you bury yourself a little further. I live in shadow. I die unseen. When you hear younger voices repeat the oath, you don't feel pride anymore. You feel grief, quiet, uninvited, relentless. Because you know they don't yet understand what they just gave away. Just like you didn't.
You've never feared dying. They trained that out of you early. You've walked through fire, through blades, through cities that no longer exist. You've seen what happens when bodies break, when names vanish. But sometimes, when the night is so still, you can hear your own eyelids move. A thought creeps in. Where do you go when even the shadows forget you? You tried praying once, not the way the priests do, not with incense or candles, just knees to earth, forehead to stone, breath shaking like something inside you wanted out. You didn't call it prayer, because prayers are meant to be heard, and you knew no one was listening. You spoke anyway, not in words, but in broken memory, in names you haven't said aloud in years, in questions like, did I have a choice? Was I ever whole? Would she recognize me now? You imagined a God, not kind, not cruel, just present. But nothing answered. No wind shifted. No dream interrupted. No omen arrived. Only silence, the kind you know too well. So you stood, brushed dust from your knees, and walked away from the altar you built out of doubt, because you already knew there is no heaven for people like you. Not because you were evil or broken or wrong, but because you were never alive enough to earn one. The order doesn't believe in paradise. They sell it like a myth, like a drug. And when your blade finds its mark and your breath slows for the final time, there will be no wings, no light, no voice, just a room without sound, without memory, without you. And in that void, maybe you'll finally belong. The roof is cold, not from wind, from stone, from time, from everything you've carried here. You've stood on rooftops before, waited, watched, struck. But tonight, there is no target, no signal, no backup. Just you and the edge. The fortress below is silent. It always was. But now, you feel it like a tomb you built from the inside. The old master is gone. No ceremony, no last words. Just an empty chair and a blade laid across it. You don't know if that's his message or his gift. You hold it now, his blade, not yours. It feels lighter than it should. Across the courtyard, the young initiates train in the moonlight. You remember their shapes, their hunger, their hope. You almost feel something. Almost. You step closer to the ledge. Below, rooftops. Beyond, mountains. Somewhere, cities, futures, paths not yet burned. But here, now, there is only this choice. You could vanish, drop your weapons, walk into the world,
Try to remember what your name tasted like in someone else's mouth. Or you could leap, not to die, not even to escape, but to leave a mark, however invisible. Because even ghosts want to know they mattered. You look at the sky, no stars tonight, just gray. The wind shifts, not much, just enough. You close your eyes, and for the first time in your life, you don't hear silence. You hear breathing, your own, alive, imperfect, still here. And then you step off. Not to fall, but to begin.